the best and easiest to use ticket platform out there. They take the confusion out of buying tickets using a 0 to 10 scoring system and a green is good, red is bad color rating system so you and your loved ones get the best deal possible. So whether it's going to see our beloved Redlegs at Great American Ballpark, the Bengals over at Paycor, FC Cincinnati, one of the area college teams, or pretty much anything in between, use promo code Riverfront at checkout and receive $20 off your first order. Click the link in the show notes to download the app and get started. That's Riverfront, one word, for $20 off.
What's up, everybody? How we doing? Welcome to the first ever Riverfront U Crosstown Shootout Preview episode. Before we get started, I want to make sure we say what's up to everybody who checks us out on Patreon each and every day at Riverfront Cincy. Thank you so much for your support. And also, everyone's been checking the website out, riverfrontcincy.com, where you've seen our work in particular. We're definitely appreciative of everything. We're excited about this. I am Tim Daniel. I am our Xavier writer, for those who don't know. Joining me is Ryan Roberts. Ryan covers the Bearcats basketball and football for us here at Riverfront Cincy. So we're going to dive into this year's Crosstown Shootout, which looks like it could be history making on the Bearcats side, is how momentum feels like it's going. So Ryan, how you doing, buddy?
Good, man. Went to the Skyline Crosstown Shootout tip-off dinner tonight down at Skyline downtown. Got to see Wes, Sean Miller, and kind of get the hype started with Saturday's game with some of the other Cincinnati media and fans.
Yeah, that's I haven't done that event yet. This is my fourth time working the shootout, but I'm still yet to do the Skyline pre-meal.
It's worth it, man. It's pretty cool. So for the Cincinnati fans, they did have Cincy Light down there that were available. And then, obviously your Skyline dinner. It's awesome. Dan Horde hosts the Cincinnati side for the Q&A with Wes Miller. I apologize. I should know the name of the gentleman interviewing Sean Miller, which is Xavier's Dan Horde, but I cannot think of his name. Yep, that's it. I knew that too from, the 1 year that I covered Xavier, and him and Byron Larkin were on the call on the radio. But yeah, so it was a cool event, man. You can definitely feel the buzz within the city right now as we get closer to Saturday.
I think we might be two of the very few people in the world that have actually covered both sides of this rivalry.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I covered. So the 1 year that I covered it, it was actually at what is now Heritage Bank Center.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so it was the year after the brawl.
The Crosstown tip-off. It was like the Crosstown, yeah, it's like something awful.
Yeah, it was year one being down there. Xavier, of course, shot the lights out. I think it was James Farr. We'll call it the James Farr game. I think he had 18 or 21 with 5 or 6 threes and just lit Cincinnati up. I can remember texting Travis after the game, like, where has that shooting been all season? Because you guys have not shot that well from outside of until that game. But, that's what it does, man. It seems like Xavier always plays one of their best games of the year against Cincinnati, at least going back for the past, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're going to need it this year, as we're going to dive into, kind of break things down. But yeah, man, let's kind of jump right into it. Let's talk about the Bearcats first. Obviously, off to an awesome start, have totally jumped the ratings in KenPom. They're now a top 30 school on there. Every time you see their box scores, they're winning by 25, 30 points. They're shooting the ball really well. Obviously, the addition to CJ Fredericks helped out a ton with that, just kind of giving them that perimeter threat they've been looking for a couple of years. And just kind of seemed like Wes Miller in year 3, getting more and more comfortable. This is my first year of Wes's career that I'm not covering the Bearcats, so I haven't been around them at all this year. So I lean on you a lot for information here. Obviously, getting Aziz back in the middle of the year, who may not be, this big offensive guy, but what he's doing protecting the rim for them has been huge. And Victor Locke and his ability to continue to score and get those 7-8 rebound games. What's kind of the thing that's really clicking for them the most that you see in this jump from year 2 to year 3 in the Wes Miller system?
So I think the biggest thing is just the depth that they have is finally allowing Wes to run the system that he wants. I don't think it can be understated the impact that John Newman has on not only offensively at that, 3-4 swing spot, but also defensively. So one thing that team really missed last year was a lockdown perimeter defender. As good as Landers Nolly was, along with David Julius, they just weren't elite guys out on the perimeter that were going to lock down the opposing team's best player. And that's something that John Newman has really taken ownership of. And his rebounding combined with athleticism and physicality going to the rim, he's a mature guy.
Yeah.
He's seen a lot of college basketball, and that can't be that's something that really needs to be mentioned when it comes to Newman. His leadership on and off the floor has really helped guide some of the younger guys like Day Thomas and Jizzle James. But I think the biggest thing that stood out to me is going back to last year, Wes Miller's always talked about Dan Skillings as a guy that can really be an elite rebounder, and we've seen that to start the season. Granted, the competition hasn't been that great, but when you have a guy that is, averaging 12 points and 8 rebounds from that 2 spot, 3 spot, depending on the lineup, it's really given this team a different dynamic because they're not relying on Victor Larkin to go in there and do all the dirty work. They're not relying on Aziz Bandiago. Aziz is averaging 10 and 5. He had 1 rebound, I believe, against Florida Gulf Coast, and they still won by 30 plus. So I think this is a team that, compared to last year's team, just a team that can, beat you in so many different ways. Victor Larkin spent a lot of time with Joey Burton over the summer working on his perimeter game. Joey Burton is a guy that has worked with over 20 NBA guys. He's the personal trainer for Georges Niang, as well as Trey Lyles. So Vic working with him this offseason has helped with his offensive game, being able to stretch the floor out to the 3-point line. Vic having a great season, averaging 15 points, 8 rebounds per game. I think that's what we all expected. It was a little tough coming out of the gate. The first 2 games, he struggled a little bit, but he kind of took that challenge personally. And ever since then, he's been awesome. There's just, you look at their lineup, looking at the stats right now, they can just beat you in so many different ways. CJ Frederick, averaging 2 or 3 shots a game, comes into this last game and pours in 19 points. He's finally aggressive, shooting off the bounce, knocking down threes. But I think the biggest thing with this team is just their overall maturity. Like, you've got guys that have played in a lot of big-time games, big-time atmospheres, and I think that's going to really benefit the Bearcats this Saturday at Cintas.
It's kind of funny, and I know this is going to make some people ick, but they almost remind me of last year's Xavier team. There was just all these veteran guys who all 5 guys can score. And, you've got, Victor Larkin kind of has that extra addition to his game, like you were talking about, where last year's Xavier team was you look at it now, the thing they're missing the most is not Colby Jones, it's Jack Nungy. It's that guy who can just stretch the floor and hit those big shots and give you 14, 15 points and just go to the top of the key. And you're starting to see a lot more of that from Cincinnati. CJ Frederick, Adam Kunkel, pretty similar players, obviously not so much height-wise, but just the things that those guys are able to do as far as shooting off the bounce and showing this occasional playmaking. And it's just kind of when you watch them, when you listen to them, when you look at the box scores, you're yeah, it kind of has it looks a little familiar.
Yeah, I think they're pressure defensively as well. They've been really good at forcing turnovers. They're 13th in the country right now, but they're also sharing the ball extremely well. I believe right now they're 5th in the country assist to turnover ratio. So they're a team that's really sharing the ball, moving the ball, which is getting the defense out of place, allowing a lot of points at the rim. And the crazy thing is, man, Jameel Reynolds hasn't stepped on the floor yet. So I don't think we've even seen the ceiling for this team yet. So it'll be interesting to see once Jameel gets in the fold, how that changes the dynamic of this team even more. I can't remember who it was, but it was a Big 12 reporter kind of mentioned that once Jameel gets eligible and is able to step on the floor for Cincinnati, there's not a team in the Big 12 with a deeper roster. Now, that obviously there might be teams with more individual talent, but as far as depth, there's not a team in the Big 12 that has more depth than them. So it's hopefully they can keep up the pace because it's been a lot of fun to follow through these first 7 games.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you definitely, like I said, you look over to the other side of town and see what they're doing, and you're like, those guys are having a lot more fun than we are over here right now. So
I've watched a few Xavier games, and I think the thing that, and help me if I'm wrong, but I think the thing that has stood out the most to me is they've had good guard play with Quincy Olivari as well as Desmond Claude, but they've struggled inside with just their rim presence at both ends of the court. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's pretty. I mean, they haven't necessarily shot the ball well until Olivari has these last 2 games. All of a sudden, he had like a stretch in the Houston game where he went nuts for 2 minutes, and then obviously at Delaware he had 34 points. But yeah, inside it's just been, like I said, like not having someone to fill the Jack Nungy role has kind of been their biggest challenge. Abu Usman's probably been the most consistent of the group. But he's not, your 22-6 kind of guy by any stretch of the matter. He's more of your 8-4 and be really aggressive. But you've really kind of just seen them kind of get pushed around a little bit. And Xavier, I mean, if you look at their KenPom numbers, they're still really, really good defensively. They're still a top 20 defensive team in the country, but they just can't figure out how to get like more points inside. And really their inside scoring for the most part has been, does Desmond Claude get to the rim? And that's a polar opposite of what it used to be for, this last year in particular, obviously with that veteran team. And it's a lot of guys, and, Quincy Olivari talked about it after the loss to Delaware this week, is that they don't have that guy. They don't have that, like, when things are going wrong, they're trying to figure out who's going to be the guy that steps up and talks. And Sean Miller kind of talked about it as well in a roundabout sense, kind of talking about like they're almost leaderless out there. And so it's a team that's still figuring out who they are. And this is not the game you want to play when you're still figuring out who you are, because the other team is sick of losing to you year in and year out. They're ready to get a win at a place they haven't won since 2001. So I'm very, very nervous for the sake of I'm not optimistic at all that they can pull this one off, unfortunately.
So something else I've noticed is maybe inconsistency with their rebounding. You look at a game like Houston, they out rebound Houston, which virtually never happens, but they're still 140th in the country in rebounds per game. Do you think some of their struggles maybe has to do with they've got kind of an older veteran group in their starting lineup, but after that, a lot of inexperience and youth?
So yes, and sorta. So you like you said, they have an older group, but look at a guy like Gitas Namiksha. This is his first time playing American college basketball. He's a senior. So it's a little different for him. It's not like he's an aging senior who played at Florida Gulf Coast and went to Xavier, right? So that's kind of what the situation there. In the youth section, Lazar Djokovic has shown the ability to score in the past. He actually has a Big East Freshman of the Week under his belt already this year, but that was like, we haven't seen much more of him than that. Actually, in the Houston game, they fully took him out. They just didn't play him anymore after a stretch because they just couldn't. They don't feel like they could rely on him. Sasashani is a freshman who hasn't really shown an ability to score, but is a big body. Is pretty physical, but I don't, haven't just been able to see him just tear something up yet to kind of be that big guy. So yeah, I think the rebounding part's really, really, really irritating when it's, it's not just like getting beat on the board. It's a lot of ball bounces off their fingertips, hits the ground. When it's on the ground, they're not getting the loose ball. And I think that's where it's like more frustrating, because this isn't like a thing. I'm not trying to dog these guys and say bad things about them, but as well as I do. If the ball's on the ground last year, Adam Kunkel's diving on it. Sule Boom's diving on it. And I think these guys will get there. It might just take a little while. They're just so happen to be, one of the best conferences in the country in basketball. So it might be a little bit more tougher come January. But right now, it just seems like it's a lot of just like trying to fit the pieces together, and it's not going very well.
How much, when you look at the roster makeup, how much do you think that had to do with Sean Miller maybe missing on some targets early on in the portal process?
I think it did. Especially Fremantle and Hunter and how things worked out with them. So Jerome Hunter's just got back to practice, but it's light practice. But, it's obviously great steps for everything he went through with that cardiac issue in the summer.
Right.
And then Fremantle, broke his foot last year at the end of the season. And finds out he has to get another surgery in the summer. So that kind of makes it really difficult because, I mean, those two dudes are very physical dudes who are going to fight like hell. And then so not having those guys has really hurt them. So I think that has hurt a lot because I think there was a really strong Pettershaw that really expected he was going to have those guys. Obviously, Fremantle is more questionable than Hunter. The Hunter thing just kind of came out of the blue. It was pretty scary. So it's great to see he's practicing again, but not having those guys has hurt them a lot. So, Sasajani was added, I think, in July to the roster. Yeah. Shokovic wasn't much later than him. Those two, I believe. Sasajani, I know for a fact, did not even go to the Bahamas with them when they played their overseas stuff this summer. So it has been a lot of you have missed out on a lot of those guys. Were they getting a Hunter Dickinson? No, absolutely not. But you had your chance to go get guys, and it just didn't work out their way because of everything else that was going on.
What are some of the matchups you're looking at as keys on the Xavier side? And then we'll hit on the Cincinnati side. But in terms of Xavier matchups, what are you looking at?
I'm really curious how things line up with Desmond Claude, who is kind of what was he in this game? Because if you watch the Houston game, you saw after the first 2 or 3 possessions, Kelvin Sampson, that first timeout, was he's not getting to the rim. We're doing everything possible to make sure he doesn't get to the rim. And if he drove, they never let him get a full head of steam. They doubled him immediately as soon as he got in the paint. There was times where he had to take the ball back out. So, what does Claude do in this game? Because it almost is where he goes, they go. If he's on, then they're in good shape. I mean, if you watch that St. Mary's game, he was really good in stretches in that game. And they have definitely guys who can step up. We talked about Oliveri. So I'm not sure because, Xavier's kind of moved around with Davey McKnight kind of being primary ball handler, Desmond Claude being the primary ball handler, though playing more as a wing on defense. So McKnight and Claude going against Frederick and Dede Thomas is unique to me. I think of those 4, Claude's probably the most talented, but, is that going to matter in a game like this is going to kind of be the biggest thing. So what does Desmond Claude bring to them? The other kind of thing that's going to be really interesting is what does Trey Green bring to this game? Because Trey Green is this guy so far. And I know you know him pretty well from the fact he was considering both schools when he was coming in, that he hasn't shot the ball great yet. So, but he'll have these games where it's 3 of 12 from 3, but those 9 points make all the difference in that game. So I'm really excited to see how Trey Green and Dalen Swain play in this game, because Swain's really been the other freshman who's really been a really kind of a bright spot for this team. It hasn't had a lot of them so far this year.
Yeah, Swain has definitely stood out defensively to me. And I'm definitely interested in seeing, I'm sure there's going to be a moment in this game where you get Jizzle James and Trey Green matched up against each other. And anyone that followed recruiting this past summer knows that Cincinnati's point guard recruiting, it came down to Trey Green and Jizzle James. Cincinnati maybe had a little bit different timeline than Trey Green. So Trey Green ends up at Xavier, Jizzle James ends up at Cincinnati. And when those two go at it, definitely different types of point guards. Yeah. So I think that matchup's going to be a lot of fun to watch because it's going to happen at some point. And then I think for Cincinnati, I think the big thing with them is point guard play. Dan Skillings is going to show up. He only played 5 minutes in the game last year. John Newman, he's going to get to play this year. I think, so you mentioned Frederick and Claude, but I think Newman is going to be that matchup. I think John Newman probably takes that matchup just because, for example, when they played Howard, Seth Towns absolutely going off. John Newman takes over with guarding him in overtime, limiting him to 1 point. So I definitely think Claude, I think Newman's going to draw that matchup with, trying to lock up Claude. But I think for Cincinnati, it just comes down to point guard play for the most part, because I think Dan Skillings is going to show up. Vic Locken's going to show up. I think Aziz has the ability to really affect the game down low with his size and length and athleticism. The interesting thing is going to be how the game is called. Is it a game where they don't want it to get chippy, so they're immediately blowing their whistle early in the game to kind of set a tone, or do they let them get physical? I think that Cincinnati's done a really good job not fouling. They're one of the teams that foul the least in the country. So if they're allowed to play their game, it's going to be really interesting to see how both teams handle the whistle. Because let's be honest, man, like Xavier shoots a lot of free throws inside Cintas. They want to get to the rim, they want to attack, and they want to draw fouls. And
they just played that game.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of who the opponent
55 fouls in the Houston game.
Yeah. I mean, regardless of who the opponent is, that's their game plan. They haven't shot the ball well from outside. I think they're 32% on the year. So their whole game plan is getting to the rim, drawing fouls, or finishing through contact or easy buckets. So Cincinnati has to do a good job limiting their fouling and staying in front of their man and playing by moving their feet, not their hands.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of, like you said, we kind of talked about there. So a lot of it was definitely the fact that LJ Cryer is just fantastic at drawing contact in that game. So I'm not going to play that card by any means. And I'm going to give him his credit because he's awesome. Jahal Sheed, as you know very well, also really freaking good at basketball. But yeah, I mean, that was a game that was really irritating because especially when you cover those games, because you're going to be there till midnight.
Right.
But yeah, there was a lot of stop play, especially in the second half. That's what Xavier has to do until they can start getting shots. So the last game that they had to win, Quincy Oliveri had no one guarding him multiple times in the corner, so he just feasted. And I don't think we're going to have that situation here, obviously, just because the different guys that are going to be playing this game on the other side of the ball. So, yeah, I think you bring up the point guard play, and I think that's really fascinating for sure. I think the lock-in versus Abu Usman thing could be interesting. Usman's already been ejected a game this year, so he's kind of had to reel it in a little bit more. So how does that kind of play into it as well? I'm really excited for the sake of just kind of seeing, what Xavier team shows up. And obviously everyone's going to point to their performances against Purdue and Houston and how they played really hard and just weren't more, the other team was just more talented than them. Life goes on. But is this going to be the team that, played against Oakland and Delaware, which no knock on those teams, but obviously there's teams that's they're bye games for a reason, right? Because they're going to play, or even the Washington game, they had Washington beat, and then they let Washington come back and beat them in Vegas. So it's, not knowing what Xavier team is going to show up each and every week is really, really irritating. But I think if they brought the effort to the UC game that they brought against Houston, they could very easily win the game. I just don't know if that's going to be an all the time thing.
Yeah, I think this is a game where on paper, I do think Cincinnati's the more talented and deeper team.
Agreed.
But you only have, I think Vic Locken is the only guy that's played in this game.
And on the other end, Claude's the only one that's played. Cam Kraft, but he doesn't play.
Right. But I think when you have a guy like CJ Frederick, he understands the rivalry.
Right.
Odio Guama played in this as well.
Right. Yeah.
John Newman
last year, that was pretty cool.
Yeah. John Newman in year one. So I think in terms of experience with what this game means, I also think Cincinnati has the edge there just because they do have some guys that have played in the game. And then you have a guy like CJ Frederick that, grew up watching the game every year. His dad would go get Skyline on the day of the game and bring it home, and the family would watch it. But the big thing for Cincinnati is they cannot afford a slow start. You look at the losses over these last couple of years. How many times at the second media timeout do you look up and it's 19-8 or 21-6? And it's like the rest of the game, you're fighting an uphill battle. Even last year, down 17 at the half. And then that whole second half, you're fighting your ass off just to get back in the game. And it's still not enough because you didn't do things right to start the game. So I definitely think if Cincinnati can get off to a hot start and kind of win those 4-minute games, as Wes likes to say, we have 10 4-minute games, win each 4-minute segment. I think the first 8 to 10 minutes are probably the most important part of the game, just because after that, you know, the emotions, the excitement, everything starts to wear off, and then you're just playing basketball. So if you can weather, you know, any early barrage or storm from Xavier and their crowd, and you can go into that under 12 media timeout, you know, we'll say with a 3 to 7 point lead. I think they're only going to be able to build on that just because at some point their depth is going to wear Xavier down, in my opinion. I don't know, man. I can't. I know Xavier, you know, UC hasn't won at Xavier since Steve Logan was there as an All-American 20 years ago, which is crazy to think about when you look at some of the teams Cincinnati's had between then and now. But I really think this is a year where they go into Cintas and win. You know, it could be anything from a 3-point win to a 15-point win. I don't think I would be surprised.
If it's not now, it's never.
Oh,
This is like the best shot they have in a long time. And I agree. Obviously, you know, on the other side of it, that's not what I want to say, but being realistic here, when you look at how these teams have played, where they're at, and yeah, this is their best chance to do it. And this is the situation where it looks like they're gonna do it. Could anything happen like we've talked about a million times in this game? Yes, it very well could. Do I expect it and should I count on it? No, not whatsoever. You know, Desmond Cloud, Quincy Oliveri combined for 60 points. Xavier probably wins.
Yeah.
But what's the likelihood they do that? I don't know. It just kind of feels like, and I know Xavier fans don't want to hear the term rebuild or anything like that, and I get it. You know, this team just went to the Sweet 16 last year. But having to do all the roster gymnastics they had to do this year, preparing to go to the Bahamas, adding guys so late, dealing with injuries to their two top front court players, it's kind of set up there. And that's not an excuse to lose. Like, Cincinnati's just in a better situation than they are at the moment. And look, everyone knows me and has heard me talk about UC in the past. It's not something where I'm like happily saying these things, but being realistic, looking at how both teams are set up right now, yeah, they're the better team at the moment. Now, does the better team always win this game? No, but it would take a lot. I mean, it would just take UC turning the ball over a lot, which, like you said, they haven't done, missing rebounds, getting in early foul trouble to kind of have Xavier make a run at this game. And what are the odds all three of those things happen? I just don't see it. I don't know. It's kind of like it's the best situation for Cincinnati to kind of go in there and take this win. And they should take this win. The spread's not out yet, obviously. I suspect it's probably going to be about 2.5 to 3 in favor of Cincinnati. But I fully suspect that this is kind of the year it happens.
So I think another thing is, you mentioned this Cincinnati team reminding you of last year's Xavier team. And this year's Xavier team kind of reminds me of last year's Cincinnati team, where you've got Claude and Oliveri, David DeJulius, and Landers Nolly. What happens if, you know, Oliveri goes out and has a terrible game?
Yeah.
Can Xavier rebound off of that and handle that? And I think another thing that I'm interested to see is, how do Xavier's guards handle Cincinnati's pressure?
Yeah, I agree. Davion McKnight's going to have to play a really big part in this game. He has not necessarily been the scorer I thought he'd be. And like, he's dealt with a lot of personal tragedy this year, obviously losing his brother, played at one game and flew out for his funeral the next day. That's difficult, man. That's tough.
Mm-hmm.
But what he has done when he's been on the floor is he's rebounded. He's passed the ball really well. He hasn't turned the ball over a ton, but this might be a game they need him to score. And he has shown the ability in his career to score when he was at Western, but he hasn't shown it at Xavier yet. So when they do lean on him to score here, when they need him to get buckets, what is that going to be like for them? Like you said, if Oliveri has a bad game, who scores from there? And your best guess at that point is Claude, Green, and McKnight. Okay, CJ Frederick has a bad game. You guys have, the Bearcats have 3 or 4 guys they can lean on to kind of take care of business there. So,
yeah, I think the most difficult thing is the last time Xavier came into a game against Cincinnati off 3 losses. Cincinnati was number 10 in the country, and Xavier wins, I think it was 71-68.
I remember that game.
So just, a game they're not expected to even compete in, and they beat a top 10 Cincinnati team. I do think the cool thing is, Wes has played in the Duke North Carolina rivalry.
Right.
And I think these last 2 seasons have kind of taught him the true meaning of this game to both sides. And he's right, it's not like any other rivalry. It's not fair to compare it to Duke Carolina because they're special in their own way. But there's no other rivalry out there where it's this intense this early in the season. And it's like that regardless of, how good or bad either team is. And I think that's one of the things that makes this rivalry so special. I am interested to see how Xavier handles if Cincinnati does come out and get up big early. How do they respond to something like that?
That's interesting because they got down big against Houston early.
Mm-hmm.
And then held them scoreless for 5 minutes and came back in the game. So they have shown the ability to handle that. It's just, can they score enough? And that's where it kind of comes back to.
So, and I think that's like from a confidence thing, coming off 3 losses, if Cincinnati comes out, those first 4 minutes, they build, an 8 to 10 point lead. How do they respond? I wasn't going to bring this up, but I'm going to bring it up. So Sean Miller made an interesting comment tonight. Could be me looking into nothing. But Joe Sunderman just got done mentioning, Cincinnati and their season, how they're doing. And Sean responds with, well, we played played Houston and Purdue. And I don't know if other people picked up on it as like a shot that, Cincinnati's not going to do anything we haven't already seen. And it could have just been a subtle jab. But maybe there is a little bit more juice here than some people realize. And the fact that Sean Miller is 4-5, he's in his team's ass right now.
Oh, yeah.
Leading up to this game, telling them, hey, this is not a game we lose. You look at the history of this series, and it sucks for Cincinnati fans over the last 15, 20 years. Like, Xavier's owned them. I hate to say it. And I don't know if that has to do with, the conference changes or if it has to do with Xavier's program just elevating to the point that they're at now nationally. But, I would say, like, regardless of Xavier's record, like, Cincinnati fans are still worried about this game. Like, they know they should win. You look at the 2 rosters, there's no reason Cincinnati shouldn't win, but there's something about Cintas Center that still has some Cincinnati fans nervous just because of how, we've seen games go over the last 5 to 10 years.
I mean, on the other end too, it's, Xavier fans are like, I don't think they're ready to handle a loss at Cintas in this game. I don't think they could take it with how bad this year's been. You mentioned him earlier. I mean, it's no secret. He's been on this network. Travis Steele's a good buddy of mine. Anytime someone talks about what he did at Xavier, it's, well, he didn't do what he was needed to do, but he went 3-1 against Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. And so he has that going for him. That's the one thing people can always say they have. And your point on Sean is exactly right. I can tell you that he is telling these guys, like, we do not lose this game. It is unacceptable to lose this game. And I think when, like, we have a couple Patreon questions we'll get to here before we close out. I think that's like the other thing is, like, would it shock me if Sean Miller outcoached Wes and Xavier won this game? No. But there's 2 things we talked about are the best chances. It's like Sean Miller's X's and O's, and you don't want to rely on that in a situation like this. You're relying on your coach to win you a game. So that's really, but yeah, like you said, like, on paper, Cincinnati's a better team. They're more together. They're more figured out what they're supposed to do. And it's just kind of a year that Xavier fans, it might just be that nightmare year. Every school has them.
Yeah. So, and I also think it was good for them. They go out and beat Georgia Tech by 35. They're riding high. And then they go to Howard and need overtime to win.
Yeah.
And I think it was good for them to face that adversity because they're going to face a lot of adversity on Saturday with the crowd, maybe calls not going their way. So the thing that stood out to me in Wes's presser after that game, leading up to this game, was that the players, it was almost like they lost the game, even though they won. So they took that they didn't play well, they knew they didn't play well, and then turned it into another 30-point blowout over FGCU, which shows me a team that can grow together and learn from wins as well to try to put things together for the following game. And that's encouraging, because Cincinnati hasn't been 7-0 since the 2017-18 season. And I think that as much excitement as there is right now around Cincinnati basketball, I don't know that Wes truly understands what this city is like when Cincinnati basketball is good.
Yeah.
So
that, and then when both programs are good, this place is awesome. It's the best. There's nothing like it.
I mean, you look at the year where, Jacob Evans, Kyle Washington, and then you had JP Makura and Trayvon Blue, both teams. One team ended up a 1 seed, one team ended up a 2 seed. We won't talk about how the tournament went for either team.
Same freaking court too.
Right. They call it, was it the Nashville Massacre? Like
Choke Cincinnati, I've seen a couple times.
Yeah, it's like it's cool for me for Wes, because Wes comes from the historic Duke Carolina rivalry, and he's starting to get a taste of what this is really like. And going into this game where one or both teams are really, really good just amplifies it, because it just gives the other side so much more juice heading into that game.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sean had some time away from it, obviously, going to Arizona. Did have Arizona State, which has had its years. It's not like this.
No, not even
like
close.
This. Maybe like the years that Oregon was good at basketball is the closest thing he had to it. But yeah.
No. So for Sean at Arizona, it was UCLA, because
that's right.
Him and Mick do not like each other.
That's false, actually.
You think?
So Sean Miller's introductory press conference, I asked him when he came back, I said, what do you think about being the first person to coach 2 years in the Crosstown? And he went on to tell a story about when he was at Arizona, him and Mick Cronin became really good friends. And when he found out he took the Xavier job again, Mick called him and said, congratulations.
I don't know, man. I think that might have I think that might be bullshit.
Sean Miller's not the bullshit kind of guy to do that.
Maybe. I don't know. Like there was
certainly something. Yeah.
I always got the impression him and Mick didn't like each other. I know Mick and Chris Mack didn't like each other, but that goes back to
high school.
High school. One kid grew up on the east side, the other on the west side, and that went back to the high school days. But I don't know, maybe you're right, but I was always under the impression that Mick and Sean didn't like each other.
Yeah, there were definitely guys I knew Mick did not like at Xavier. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, it seems like him and Sean, I guess, like from what Sean said, I guess they're pretty decent. There was that cameo, of course, for Xavier fans paid Mick Cronin to congratulate Sean for getting the job. That was kind of awesome.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. Whoever paid to do that, shout out to you.
Yeah. All right. Well, I do want to get to these questions before we get out of here, but I guess we'll do this real fast. I think we both kind of said we both expect the Bearcats to win. I think Xavier's going to show up. I think they're going to play hard. I just don't think they have enough. I think this is going to be pretty similar to like the Houston game and the Purdue game. This is going to be like one of those like 72-65 UC wins. And tip your hat to them. They'll have earned this one. They'll finally get the game in Cintas they've been looking for.
5 straight games for Cincinnati over, I think, 85 points. I don't know that streak continues, but I do look for them to score more than 75.
Yeah, it's still gonna be a fun atmosphere. It's still gonna be a great environment.
Oh yeah,
Other
than sitting up at the top of the arena covering it.
I don't have to do that, my guy.
Well, not you, but Cincinnati media. We will be at the top of the arena, fully expecting that.
Did you get a pass?
Yeah. We'll be
okay,
there.
So you'll be there too?
Mm-hmm.
No one tells me this shit.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So I got some questions from one of our Patreon listeners, and he gives 3 pretty good ones. So I want to make sure I get a mouth shout out to Kevin Lynch. I know, big Bearcat fan.
Yeah.
So first question was, How does UC lose this game? It seems like they're better set up for a win than any time in recent memory, but we both know how this series has gone this century. Well, we just said we don't expect them to lose, but the way they could lose is Xavier's defense is just suffocating for 40 minutes and they just have a bad shooting day. That's asking a lot, but it's the only thing I can really think of.
Well, to add to that, I would say foul trouble and turnovers. Xavier had 17 turnovers against Delaware.
Yeah.
So, I mean, foul trouble and turnovers would definitely contribute to a UC loss as well. If looking at the box score at the end of the game.
Who is your favorite player from the other school that you were a fan of all time? Meaning, if you're a Muskie fan, which Bearcat you can't help but like, and vice versa. I mean, Melvin Levitt's an old buddy of mine. Like, we had a decent relationship for a while, but covering David Julius for 3 years, I loved him. He was he was a great interview. He was a fun player to watch. Had probably one of the most frustrating, painstaking, frustrating, pump fakes you'd ever see defenders because they fell for it every time. I loved covering DJ. So probably David for me.
I'm gonna be honest, man. I can't think of
Trayvon. I mean, Trayvon was pretty fun.
Yeah. Oh, fun to cover, not like who you personally. Yeah, Trayvon was fun to cover. As far as relationship wise, Sean O'Mara was actually a really good to me when I covered Xavier. JP McCure, not so much, which I don't think that comes to any surprise to UC fans or probably Xavier fans either. But yeah, Sean O'Mara JP was fun Trayvon was definitely fun to watch. I still remember him just absolutely lighting UC up in the one crosstown shoot in fifth third. But yeah, Sean O'Mara was probably my favorite Xavier player to talk to when I covered them.
I haven't seen him in a while. I know he was playing in China for a while.
Yeah.
Admit one guy from your team that you never liked, even though he was on your team. I don't know if I'm allowed to do that. They might get mad at me.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's been guys that thought, never really had a player I was dreading ever having a conversation with or anything like that. So.
Well, at the end of the day, man, regardless of which side you support, there are a lot of really good dudes on both teams.
For sure.
Regardless of what your opinion is of them on the court, there are still Quentin Gooden. I would say, actually, now that I think about it, Quentin Gooden's probably my favorite Musketeer. But, I've got a great relationship with his dad, Chris. Covered Q throughout his high school career. He's always been really good to me. Still reaches out to me when my dad passed away in August. Q was one of the first ones to reach out to me and offer his condolences. So that really meant a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, there are a lot of good dudes on both sides, even though you don't like the fan base.
Well, that's what's so funny is anytime you hear people who've played in this rivalry talk about it, it's there's 40 minutes on the court. We're battling. But then you hear all the time, it's we were all just kind of hanging out over the summer and working out together, and we went and did this, and it's always kind of funny when you hear those conversations. Who was it? Mark Lyons, I remember one year was he's I hang out with Sean Kilpatrick all the time, whatever. So it's it's always because there's 40 minutes when they're on the court, it's aggressive, it's physical, and then after in the summer, if you're around town, you see them somewhere, they're shooting the shit and hanging out. So.
Yeah, there are some guys that don't like each other.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
I don't really think too much for this year, but within the last 5 years, there's definitely been some guys that did not like each other off the court.
Yeah. Jeremiah and Adam used to make me laugh because they would always say stuff to each other on the internet. So that always cracked me up.
Yeah. I really wish I could find, I don't remember which year it was since I got their ass kicked, but Vic Locken posted a picture of a toilet and the X inside of it flushing down the toilet. And then they go out and get their ass kicked a couple nights later in the shootout. So hopefully Vic doesn't give any added fuel for this year.
Oh, and that's the last question we got. Say one nice thing about the other school. Way too intense hatred from fans on both sides. It's one thing to sports hate a rival, but feel like a lot of fans take the rivalry way too far. I'll agree with that.
Yeah.
Because I do think Fifth Third's a really cool place to cover a game. I think it's just like an awesome facility. It's a great arena. The crowd's great and they're loud. I just hate where you sit because there's like no stopping anyone from just looking at what you're doing if like someone just walks by you. But I loved my time covering the Bear. I loved going to Fifth Third. That was the credential I worked the hardest to get with the previous administration. But you know, I really enjoyed being there. I thought a lot of fun. I got to cover my favorite player of all time coaching against UC multiple times when I was there. So I had a great time covering the Bearcats.
Yeah. I obviously haven't covered a game at Xavier in over 10 years. But definitely a very nice arena, nice facility. And their colors don't bother me. Like navy blue and gray together really doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
It's a color scheme I'd wear. I feel like red and black is a little bit better, but that's just me being biased. Yeah, I mean, I think the coolest thing is I was talking to Katrina Merriweather tonight. And even though this is still a big game, it just doesn't have the same meaning as it did back when the two teams were in Conference USA and the A10. Like back then, the two teams were playing for tournament berths. Now with, one team being in the Big East, the other being in the Big 12, this game is for seeding. So it's kind of cool that, this rivalry has gotten to the point that it is with how much the two programs, I mean, Cincinnati historically has always been really good, but, being in the Big 12 now and both teams kind of being on similar footing, it's kind of cool to see how this rivalry's grown over the years.
Yeah, it is. Especially, like I said, kind of being in the media room with both these programs and kind of seeing how, like, it's come up with the talent they've been bringing in and the coaching changes. I've seen way too many coaching changes in my short time. I've been doing this for about 8 years. Between all three schools, I've seen at least one coaching change. So it gets a little wild, but to see the fact that it's kind of hung over and kept going and doing its thing, there's nothing like it, man. There's nothing like Cintas in Fifth Third. There's nothing like Crosstown. The whole like joke that Norwood's not in Cincinnati still makes me laugh because it's the worst thing you can possibly pull out of in an argument. Well, you're not even in Cincinnati. It's like the stupidest thing ever, but it makes me laugh that that's what people go out there. It's like take that. But yeah, man, it's going to be a fun night. I'm looking forward to it. It might not go my way, but hopefully that means you get really good clicks on the website because your team won. At the end of the day, the Riverfront wins. So I'll take it. But with that being said, I think we're going to wrap this up. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thanks for your questions. Everything here. I know we're excited about that. It's the first time we've ever had two writers at the Crosstown. So, we did last year, but first time we've had two writers at Cintas for the Crosstown. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Ryan, definitely appreciate it, man. I guess I will see you Saturday.
Yeah, I'll see you Saturday, Tim.
All right, man.